The morning air in Astoria carried the scent of salt and freshly turned soil. Lydia Collins' heart knelt in her garden, her gloved hands brushing damp earth as she planted a new row of pink camellias along the fence. The blooms shimmered faintly under the pale sunlight, their petals still wet from last night's rain. She leaned back to admire her work, her lips curving into a quiet smile. For a brief moment, everything felt still, the gulls circling overhead, the whisper of the river in the distance, even the faint hum of life from the neighboring houses. Then came the sound of wheels against gravel. "Mom, watch out!" one of the twins shouted. Before Lydia could turn, two scooters sped past her, their tires kicking up clumps of mud. Ben swerved too close to the flower bed, the wheel clipping one of the newly planted camellias and snapping its stem clean in half. Lydia gasped. "Ben!" she called, rising from her knees. The boy froze mid-turn, guilt flashing across his freckled face, while Sam burst out laughing, pointing at the ruined flower. Michael appeared on the porch, coffee mug in hand, his gray sweater dusted with sawdust from the workshop. "Told you," he said, chuckling. "You can't plant peace when you've got two hurricanes in helmets." Lydia sighed, but her tone softened. "Apologize to the camellia, Ben. And to me." "Sorry, Mom," he muttered, then crouched to fix the broken stem, as if his small hands could undo the damage. Michael came over and ruffled the boy's hair. "I'll cut a new stake for it after breakfast. Maybe the camellia will forgive us if we feed it some pancakes." Lydia shook her head, smiling despite herself. That was Michael, always finding warmth in the small cracks of the day. As the twins rolled toward the house, still arguing about who was faster, Lydia lingered by the flower bed, wiping her gloves against her apron. The camellia's broken stem drooped in her hand, fragile yet alive. It reminded her how easily beauty could be harmed, how quickly something delicate could fall apart. A soft engine hum drew her attention toward the driveway. A silver sedan pulled up, sunlight bouncing off its windshield. The door opened, and Rachel stepped out, her hair tied back in a loose ponytail, a tote bag over her shoulder. "Surprise," she said, smiling. Lydia blinked in disbelief, then hurried forward. "Rachel, you were supposed to be in Portland until next week." Plans changed. Rachel's eyes sparkled, and she hesitated for a beat before speaking again. "I wanted to tell you in person. Adam proposed last night." For a moment, time stilled. The seagulls' cries seemed distant, the wind holding its breath. Lydia reached out, her fingers trembling slightly as they brushed her daughter's cheek. He did, Rachel laughed, showing her ring. "We haven't set a date yet, but it feels right, Mom. It really does." Michael stepped outside, his expression lighting up. "Well, I'll be damned. My little girl's getting married." The twins hooped from the porch, jumping around. Lydia smiled, but something beneath her ribs tightened, a flicker of unease she couldn't quite name, as Rachel hugged her tightly. The familiar scent of jasmine shampoo filled her senses, carrying her back to another day, another promise, another moment when everything had seemed perfect before it wasn't. Lydia drew a steady breath, forcing the thought away as the wind rustled through the camellias. "Let's go inside," she said softly. "You can tell us everything." And as they walked toward the porch, the morning sun broke through the clouds, bright and unknowing of the storm that once began in another life. Dinner at the Hart household was rarely quiet, but that evening carried a special kind of warmth. The scent of roasted chicken and rosemary filled the kitchen, mingling with the laughter of the twins as they fought over the last dinner roll. Michael poured himself a glass of cider and leaned back in his chair, eyes crinkling with contentment. Across the table, Rachel was glowing in a way Lydia hadn't seen since she was a child. The girl, no, the young woman, sat with her hands clasped tightly around her water glass. eyes darting from her mother to her stepfather, as if searching for the right moment. "So," Michael said, breaking the easy silence, "have you two picked a date yet?" Rachel smiled nervously. "Not exactly. We're thinking late August. Adam's parents offered to host at their vineyard near Salem." "A vineyard," Michael said, impressed. "Now that's classy. Your mom will finally get her dream outdoor wedding. Just not for herself." Lydia smiled faintly, her fork pausing midway to her plate. Rachel laughed, the sound soft and light. "Actually, there's something else," she said, glancing down. Her hand brushed her stomach almost imperceptibly. "We weren't planning to tell anyone yet, but since I'm home, you should know." The chatter faded. Even Ben and Sam stopped arguing. "No, what, sweetheart?" Michael asked gently. Rachel hesitated, then exhaled. "I'm pregnant." For a heartbeat, no one moved. The words seemed to hover in the air like a drop of water before it falls. Then Michael rose from his chair, his face breaking into an astonished grin. Wait, seriously? Rachel, that's amazing." He walked around the table and hugged her tightly, laughter rumbling in his chest. "We're going to be grandparents. Lydia!" Lydia's hand tightened around her napkin. She smiled, because that's what mothers do, but her chest felt hollow, her pulse uneven. "That's wonderful news," she managed, her voice softer than she intended. Rachel beamed. "We didn't plan it this soon, but it feels right. Adam's thrilled. We'll make it work." "Of course you will," Michael said. "You're both responsible, and we'll help however we can." Ben grinned. "Does that mean we get to babysit?" "Not until you stop fighting over roles," Michael teased, ruffling his hair. The table erupted in laughter again, but Lydia stayed, quiet, her gaze fixed on the flickering candle between them. The flame bent and straightened, casting shadows across Rachel's face. She saw her daughter's joy, her youth, the same fierce certainty she once had, and for the briefest second, fear trembled inside her. After dinner, the family drifted to the living room. Lydia washed the dishes alone, her hands moving automatically beneath the warm water. Through the window, rain began to fall, soft, steady, familiar. Later, she sat on the porch, wrapped in a shawl, listening to the rhythm of droplets against the roof. The house behind her glowed with life, laughter echoing faintly through the walls. Lydia looked out toward the darkened garden, where the camellias bowed under the rain, fragile yet enduring. In the hush of the night, she heard her mother's voice, gentle and distant, as if carried by the sea breeze. "Some truths can't be rushed." Lydia closed her eyes, letting the sound of the rain answer for her. The rain deepened through the night, carrying Lydia backward in time, to a different house, a different sound. Not the soft rhythm of Oregon rain, but the sharp, metallic tapping against tall windows in her father's mansion outside Portland. Even as a child, she had hated that house, the silence inside it, the echo of her own footsteps across the marble floor. Her father, George Collins, liked things quiet. He said noise was for people who hadn't learned control. A house should reflect the people who live in it, he often told her, seated at the long mahogany table, his cufflinks glinting in the light. And Collins never loses composure. Lydia used to wonder if he even knew what laughter sounded like. At 8, she learned that speaking too loudly during dinner made him close his eyes, exhale, and whisper her name with slow disappointment. That whisper always hurt more than shouting would have. Her mother, Margaret, was gentle, a woman whose smile could soften even George's sharpest words, though only for a moment. Margaret spent her days tending the garden behind the house, where hydrangeas grew in careful rows. "These are the only things he can't control," she once told Lydia with a wink, tucking a flower into her daughter's hair. But Margaret's laughter came less often as the years went by. She grew paler, thinner, her voice quieter. George's business dinners stretched late into the night, and when he came home, the smell of whiskey followed him down the hall. Lydia learned to read the air, the stiffness of his shoulders, the way his jaw moved when he was disappointed. She learned when to speak and when to disappear. One winter evening, Lydia had come downstairs after hearing a crash. Her mother was sitting on the floor, surrounded by shattered glass, her hand bleeding from a broken vase. George stood above her, calm but cold. "I asked you not to touch my study," he said simply, as if that explained everything. Lydia wanted to scream, to defend her mother, but Margaret shook her head, eyes pleading. "Not now, darling." The next morning, the blood was gone, the glass swept up, and the house was as silent as ever. It was always like that in the Collins home. Pain neatly hidden behind closed doors, truth polished away like dust on a chandelier. When Margaret died a few years later, the doctor said it was her heart. Lydia knew better. She'd watched the light fade from her mother's eyes long before that final day. At the funeral, George didn't cry. He stood by the grave, his face a mask of respectability. When Lydia wept, he placed a hand on her shoulder and said, "Your mother was a good woman. You'll learn from her how to hold yourself with grace." That was the first time Lydia realized love in that house came with terms, earned through silence, obedience, and perfection. She was expected to become a reflection of his name, not her own. Years later, when she finally walked away from that house, she didn't look back. But sometimes, when rain tapped the window just so, she could still hear his voice, smooth, distant, and final, reminding her that even affection in the Collins family came with conditions. Lydia met Eric Miller during her final semester of high school, long before life began to harden around her. He was the janitor's son, a year older, with calloused hands and a smile that never seemed to hide anything. Most afternoons, while George Collins's black sedan waited outside to drive her home, Lydia would sneak away to the old maintenance shed near the football field. That's where Eric fixed things, mowers, bikes, broken light fixtures. She brought him coffee once, just as a thank you, but kept coming back because he made her laugh in a way no one at home ever could. Eric wasn't polished or cautious. He looked her in the eyes when he spoke, and when he listened, he did it like her words mattered. Their first kiss happened under the bleachers during a spring storm that swept through Portland. Lydia remembered how the rain soaked her uniform and his jacket, how the smell of wet grass mixed with his skin. "You don't belong in that house," he whispered once, brushing her cheek. "You belong wherever you feel safe." It was the first time anyone had said that to her. By summer, they were inseparable. Eric took her to his mother's tiny apartment above the laundromat, where they cooked spaghetti on a single burner and talked about the future. He wanted to be a mechanic, open his own garage. She dreamed of studying art history. For a little while, both dreams seemed possible. When she turned 19, Lydia found out she was pregnant. She told Eric on a cool evening by the river. His face went pale, then softened into something fierce and determined. "We'll get married," he said immediately. "We'll make it work." And she believed him. But George Collins didn't. When Lydia told her father, he didn't shout. He simply stared at her, his expression unreadable. "That boy has nothing to offer you," he said quietly. "You'll ruin your life chasing a feeling." Lydia stood her ground. "It's not just a feeling, Dad. It's love." George nodded once, a gesture too calm to trust. "Then you won't mind if I have a word with him." She didn't know about the meeting until later. George had called Eric to his office downtown, a sleek tower of glass overlooking the city. Eric arrived in his worn jacket, grease still under his nails. George offered him coffee, spoke with the slow patience of a man who'd already decided the outcome. "You're young," he said. "You think this will end like a movie. But life doesn't work that way. You can't provide for her. You'll trap her in poverty." Then came the envelope, a folded check, a number Eric could hardly comprehend. With one condition, walk away. That night, Eric didn't come to meet her. His phone was off. The next day, a short note arrived in her mailbox. I'm sorry. You deserve better than me. No explanation, no farewell. Just those words and the silence that followed. For years afterward, Lydia would replay that day in her mind. The echo of her father's office door closing, the way he straightened his tie when she asked where Eric had gone. And though she never heard the truth spoken aloud, she knew. Her father had talked like a man, and in doing so, he'd stolen the only place she'd ever felt at home. The meeting took place on a gray afternoon that smelled of rain and cigarettes. George Collins's office, perched above the Portland skyline, was immaculate, chrome, leather, and silence. Eric Miller stood by the window, his work jacket still damp from the drizzle outside, his hands shoved deep in his pockets to hide their trembling. George closed a folder and gestured toward the chair across from him. Sit, he said calmly, as if speaking to an employee rather than the young man who wanted to marry his daughter. Eric obeyed, every muscle in his body taut. I know you care for Lydia, George began, his voice smooth as glass. But caring isn't the same as providing. My daughter has lived a certain way, educated, sheltered. You can't give her that. Eric met his gaze. With all due respect, sir, I don't want to give her luxury. I just want to give her a home. George's smile didn't reach his eyes. A noble thought, but homes built on dreams collapse quickly. He opened a drawer and placed an envelope on the desk. The sound was soft, but it made Eric's stomach twist. Your mother's been sick, hasn't she? Hospital bills piling up. Eric stiffened. How do you? I do my research, George interrupted. This will cover everything. Treatment, medication, recovery. Enough to give her the care she deserves. He slid the envelope forward. All you need to do is end things with Lydia. Cleanly. No scenes, no explanations. You'll both move on. Eric stared at the envelope. His heart pounded, so hard he thought George might hear it. He imagined his mother's thin hands gripping his, the rattle in her breath, the unpaid invoices stacked on the counter. He imagined Lydia's face, the way she looked at him like he was her whole world. You're asking me to sell her trust, he whispered. I'm giving you a choice, George corrected. Be a hero for your mother, or destroy both women in your life trying to have it all. For a long moment, the room was silent except for the rain against the glass. Then, with a trembling breath, Eric reached out and took the envelope. Outside the office door, Lydia froze. She had come looking for her father, meaning to apologize for shouting earlier. She hadn't meant to overhear, but the door was ajar and her father's voice carried. Every word hit like a stone. She pressed a hand to her mouth, her vision blurring as Eric's voice cracked through the air. I'll do it. She stumbled backward, bumping into the wall. The envelope. The deal. Her father's calm tone. It all spun in her head until she could barely breathe. When she finally made it outside, the drizzle had turned into a downpour. That night, the storm swept across Portland, thunder shaking the windows of the Collins mansion. Lydia sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the raindrops racing down the glass. Somewhere in the city, Eric was probably holding that envelope, and her father was sipping whiskey in triumph. For the first time in her life, Lydia understood that love in her father's world was just another transaction, and she was the price that had been paid. The storm had been brewing since dusk, heavy clouds pressing low over Portland when Lydia finally packed a small duffel bag with trembling hands. The rain outside was relentless, hissing against the tall windows of the Collins estate as thunder rolled somewhere over the Willamette River. In her room, she stood frozen before the mirror, her reflection ghostly pale beneath the flickering light. Her father's words still echoed through her mind, twisting into something sharp and irreversible. Be a hero for your mother, or destroy both women in your life. He had won, and Eric had agreed. She moved like someone half awake, pulling on her coat, sliding her mother's small locket into her pocket. It was the only thing in that house that still felt like love. She glanced once at the closed door of her father's study downstairs. Light still glowed beneath it, steady and cold. Lydia took a breath, then slipped out. The streets were nearly empty, the wind howling between buildings, sweeping rain sideways. By the time she reached the bus station, her clothes were soaked through, hair plastered to her face. She bought a one-way ticket with the few bills she had, destination, Astoria. She didn't know what waited there, only that it was far enough from everything she wanted to forget. The bus groaned along the coastal highway, wipers struggling against sheets of rain. The driver cursed under his breath as lightning flashed across the cliffs. When the engine sputtered near mile marker 62, Lydia's stomach sank. "That's it," the man said, pounding the steering wheel. "She's done. Closest town's about 5 miles. Lydia looked out into the darkness, where only the vague outline of pine trees and the hiss of rain filled the world. "I'll walk," she said quietly, gathering her bag. He stared at her as if she were insane. "Miss, it's dangerous out there. You should wait. Someone'll come by." But Lydia was already stepping down into the storm. The cold hit her like a slap. Wind tore at her coat, the rain stinging her skin. She walked along the shoulder of US 101, shoes sinking into mud, headlights passing only once or twice before disappearing again into the endless dark. Each step grew heavier, her breath coming in shallow bursts. She told herself she'd keep walking until she saw light. Any light. After an hour, her legs shook with exhaustion. The highway curved inland, opening into a stretch of forest that smelled of pine and salt. Through the sheets of rain, she finally saw it, a faint yellow glow through the trees. A house set back from the road. Relief surged through her, raw and desperate. She stumbled off the pavement, pushing through wet branches that clawed at her arms. The house loomed ahead, small and weathered, its windows dark except for one faint light near the porch. A sign on the gate read "For sale," half torn, swaying in the wind. She climbed the steps, knees buckling, her body trembling from cold. "Hello," she called, her voice barely a whisper. No answer. The door was locked, but the porch roof offered shelter. She sank to her knees, her soaked bag sliding from her shoulder. The world blurred around her, the rain, the wind, the pounding in her chest. Her last thought before everything went black was of her mother's voice, soft and distant, whispering her name like a prayer. Then the darkness swallowed her whole, and the storm went on raging above the sea. The storm eased by dawn, leaving the coast washed in gray and mist. The air smelled of salt and wet cedar as Michael Hart steered his old pickup down the narrow road that curved toward the sea. He was heading to a client's cabin to repair storm damage, his toolbox rattling in the back. As he rounded a bend, something caught his eye, a splash of color on the porch of the long-abandoned house near the dunes. At first, he thought it was a pile of wind-blown clothes. Then it moved. Michael stopped the truck and stepped out into the drizzle. A woman lay curled by the door, her hair plastered to her face, her skin pale against the wooden planks. Her hand was pressed protectively over her stomach. "Hey," he called, rushing toward her. "Ma'am? Can you hear me?" She stirred faintly, her lips moving without sound. He felt for a pulse, weak but steady. The rain began again, light but cold, soaking through his jacket. "Hang on," he murmured, lifting her into his arms. She was lighter than he expected, shivering uncontrollably as he carried her to the truck. "You're okay now. We'll get you help." The nearest hospital was 20 minutes away, but on a road slick with rain, it felt like forever. Lydia drifted in and out of consciousness, catching fragments of light and sound. The hum of the engine, the creak of wipers, a man's voice saying something about Astoria General. Then pain ripped through her abdomen, sharp and unrelenting. She gasped, clutching her stomach. When the nurse wheeled her into the emergency ward, everything blurred into white. "She's in labor," someone said. 38 weeks, maybe more. Lydia tried to speak, to explain, but the contractions came fast, leaving her breathless, between waves of pain. She saw the stranger, the man who had found her, standing by the doorway, soaked to the bone, eyes full of quiet worry. Hours passed in flashes of light and thunder outside, and then, amidst the storm's fading roar, a newborn's cry pierced the air. The sound was small, fragile, but alive. The nurse smiled. "It's a girl." Lydia turned her head weakly, tears mixing with rainwater on her cheeks. The doctor spoke softly, praising her strength. But all she could see was the tiny bundle in the nurse's arms. Pink, trembling, perfect. She wanted to hold her, to whisper her name. But fear coiled tight in her chest. What could she possibly offer this child? Later that night, when the ward grew quiet, Lydia sat upright, still pale and trembling. She had dressed, her belongings packed neatly on the chair. The baby slept in the bassinet beside her, unaware of her mother's turmoil. Lydia touched the edge of the blanket, her heart breaking. She leaned close and whispered, "I'm sorry." Before she could stand, the door opened. Michael was there, carrying a thermos of coffee, his eyes weary but kind. "You're leaving." Lydia froze, unable to answer. He stepped closer, his voice low but certain. "You don't have to run anymore. Not from her. Not from yourself." He looked down at the sleeping infant, then back at Lydia. "She deserves a home," he said simply. The words struck deep, cutting through the fog of fear. Lydia sank back into the chair, tears spilling freely now. Michael didn't say anything more. He just pulled a chair beside her, and together they watched the dawn crawl through the window, soft, uncertain, but full of new light. And when the nurse came in to ask for the baby's name, Lydia hesitated, then whispered the one that felt right. "Rachel." Years slipped by quietly, carried on the tide and the sound of gulls calling over the water. Lydia and Michael built their life piece by piece, steady and simple, like the rhythm of the sea outside their window. The old coastal house he once repaired became their home, a place of worn floors, salt-stained windows, and sunlight that streamed through lace curtains in the mornings. Lydia found work at the elementary school in town, teaching art and reading to second graders. She loved the smell of chalk and crayons, the way small hands clutched paintbrushes like they were holding magic. Michael's carpentry business grew through word of mouth. He built kitchen tables, porch swings, and window frames that seemed to belong to the land itself. Rachel grew up among sawdust and ocean spray, chasing shells along the shore while her mother graded papers on the porch. She had her father's steadiness, her mother's eyes, and a curiosity that filled every corner of the small house. When she turned 5, Michael built her a dollhouse that mirrored their home, down to the creaky front step and the tiny flowers painted along the fence. Lydia watched him work, her heart tightening each time he smiled at the little girl who believed he could fix anything. They married quietly at the courthouse one spring morning, surrounded only by a few close friends and the twins' godparents. There was no music, no long speeches, just the steady hum of the rain outside and the warmth of Michael's hand in hers. It wasn't the wedding her father would have wanted for her, but it was the only kind that felt true. Years later, when Rachel turned 10, Lydia discovered she was pregnant again. The news came as both a shock and a blessing. The doctor laughed gently when he pointed at the screen. 2 heartbeats, strong and steady. "Twins," he said, smiling. Lydia wept, overwhelmed by the sound. Ben and Sam arrived early, small and fierce, filling the house with sleepless nights and laughter that bounced off the walls. Rachel became their protector, reading stories to them and teaching them to build sandcastles at low tide. The house never knew silence again, but Lydia wouldn't have traded it for the world. Still, there were nights when she'd stand by the window, watching the lights shimmer across the Columbia River, and feel a quiet ache she couldn't name. The locket she wore, the one that had once belonged to her mother, felt heavier against her skin. She'd touch it absently whenever Rachel called Michael Dad, torn between gratitude and guilt. Michael never asked about her past. He seemed to understand that some stories didn't need to be told to be believed. But sometimes, when he caught her staring out at the water too long, he would rest his hand on her shoulder, grounding her back to the present. "You're here now," he'd say softly, and she was. The house smelled of pancakes in the mornings, cedar shavings in the afternoons, and rain most nights. Yet beneath the laughter and the ordinary peace of their days, Lydia carried a truth that refused to fade, one she knew she'd have to face someday when the time was right. The house was quiet, too quiet for the night before a wedding. Lydia lay in bed, staring at the faint shimmer of moonlight that filtered through the curtains. Michael's soft breathing came from beside her, the twins asleep in their room down the hall, but her mind refused to rest. Her thoughts kept circling the same truth, the one she'd carried for 19 years like a stone in her chest. Tomorrow, her daughter would walk down an aisle, start her own life, and Lydia couldn't let her do it without knowing where she came from. She rose quietly, wrapped herself in a shawl, and stepped out to the porch. The night smelled of rain, the kind that came gentle, more whisper than storm. She sat on the old swing Michael had built, its ropes creaking faintly, and listened to the waves breaking beyond the dunes. The air felt thick with memory. "Couldn't sleep either," a soft voice asked behind her. Lydia turned. Rachel stood barefoot in her robe, her hair loose, a faint glow of excitement still in her eyes. "Big day tomorrow," she said, sitting beside her mother. "I remember the night before my own wedding," Lydia murmured. "I was scared. Happy but scared." Rachel smiled. "You? Scared? I don't believe that." Lydia gave a quiet laugh. "Oh, I was terrified. Life has a way of making us brave only after it's too late to turn back." They sat in silence for a while, the rain tapping gently against the railing. Lydia could feel her heartbeat echo in her throat. She had rehearsed the words for years, but never found the courage to say them. Until now. "Rachel," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "There's something I should have told you a long time ago." Her daughter looked at her, curious, calm. "What is it?" "Michael. He isn't your biological father." The words came out softer than she'd expected, yet they hung in the air, sharp and unyielding. "I met someone before him. I loved him once, but it ended before you were born. I thought keeping it secret would protect you." For a moment, the only sound was the rain. Then Rachel exhaled slowly, her lips curving into a small, knowing smile. "Mom," she said gently, "I already knew." Lydia froze. "You what?" Rachel laughed softly, almost embarrassed. "In college, we did one of those ancestry DNA kits for biology class. It matched me to a family in Seattle I didn't recognize. I figured it out after that. But I didn't say anything because it didn't change who my dad is, or who you are." Tears welled in Lydia's eyes before she could stop them. "You should have been angry with me." "I was," Rachel admitted, "for about 5 minutes. Then I realized you've always been honest in the ways that mattered. You taught me how to love, how to stay, how to build something real. That's more than enough." Lydia's breath hitched as Rachel leaned her head on her shoulder. The rain thickened, then softened again, a steady heartbeat against the porch roof. Lydia wrapped her arm around her daughter and whispered, "You have no idea how much you saved me." Rachel smiled. "You saved me first." And as they sat there, the night before everything changed, the storm outside gave way to silence, and the truth, at last, felt light enough to bear. Morning arrived wrapped in a thin veil of mist, the kind that blurred the line between sea and sky. The house buzzed with quiet excitement, Rachel's wedding day. Lydia was in the kitchen icing a small batch of cupcakes when she heard hushed voices in the hallway. It was the unmistakable whisper fight of the twins. "Ben, are you sure you heard right?" Sam asked, his voice half shock, half thrill. "I'm positive," Ben insisted. "Mom said she had another husband before Dad." "No way," Sam gasped. "Then that means Rachel's dad is someone else." Ben nodded solemnly. "We have to tell Dad. It's like family history." Before Lydia could react, 2 pairs of small feet thundered through the house. She turned just as the twins burst into the living room where Michael was adjusting his tie in front of the mirror. "Dad," Ben blurted, face flushed with importance. "Did you know Mom had another husband before you?" Michael blinked, the tie frozen halfway through a knot. Lydia, still holding the icing spatula, felt her stomach drop. "Ben Hart," she warned, "you are not supposed to." But it was too late. Sam jumped in to add, "Yeah, we heard it last night. She told Rachel everything. You're like her second husband." For a long moment, silence filled the room. Then Michael started to laugh. Deep, unrestrained laughter that made even the twins hesitate. "Well," he said, wiping his eyes, "I guess the secret's out." Lydia shot him a mock glare, but there was no heat in it. "You're enjoying this far too much." "Come on." "Lydia," he teased, looping an arm around her waist. "You've been mysterious for 19 years. I deserve one dramatic revelation before retirement." Rachel appeared in the doorway, dressed in her robe, hair pinned up for the ceremony. "What's going on?" Ben puffed up proudly. "We just found out Mom had another husband." Rachel groaned, covering her face. "You two seriously need new hobbies." Lydia couldn't help laughing. The sound came out shaky at first, then freer. The tension that had haunted the house for days, years, really melted into the easy chaos of family noise. Michael bent down to the twins' level, lowering his voice conspiratorially. "Tell you what," he said, "let's keep this between us, okay? Otherwise, your mom might realize she can still trade up." Lydia swatted at him with the spatula, laughing as the twins howled. "Don't encourage them." By the time the laughter died down, the kitchen smelled of sugar and coffee, sunlight spilling through the window. Lydia looked around the room, Michael wiping icing off his sleeve, Rachel rolling her eyes with a smile, Ben and Sam pretending to duel with spoons, and felt something shift inside her. The past no longer loomed like a shadow, it simply existed, folded neatly into the story of who they were. Michael caught her gaze and smiled softly. "You okay?" Lydia nodded. "Better than okay." He leaned closer, whispering, "Told you, storm's over." Outside, the clouds were breaking apart, the sea gleaming beneath them. For the first time in years, Lydia didn't look for the next wave. She just let herself breathe, surrounded by the laughter that had once felt impossible. A full year had passed since the wedding, and the rhythm of the Hart household had shifted again. The air in the house now carried a softer sound, the steady, sweet cooing of a newborn. Rachel sat by the window, her hair loose around her shoulders, the morning light falling across her face as she rocked the baby in her arms. "Mom," she said quietly, looking up with tired but glowing eyes, "we decided on a name. We're calling him George." Lydia froze for a heartbeat, her breath catching. "George?" Rachel smiled. "I wanted to name him after Grandpa. I thought maybe it's time to turn something painful into something new." The words lingered long after Rachel went to rest. That night, as the house fell quiet, Lydia couldn't sleep. The name echoed through her chest like a door opening she'd kept locked for too long. 2 days later, she received a call from Portland Hospice. The voice on the other end was gentle but certain. Mrs. Hart, this is about your father. He's been under our care for several months. His health is declining quickly. If you wish to see him—" Lydia sat in silence, the phone pressed to her ear. "He's still alive," she whispered. "Yes," the nurse replied. "He's asked for you." Rain followed her all the way to Portland, a thin, steady drizzle that blurred the city into gray. She carried baby George in her arms, bundled tightly, his tiny breaths rising and falling against her chest. The hospice was quiet, filled with the faint hum of machines and the smell of antiseptic mixed with lavender. When she stepped into the room, she barely recognized him. George Collins, the man who had once towered over her world, lay small and fragile beneath a thin blanket. His hair was white, his skin translucent. Yet when he turned his head and saw her, his eyes, sharp blue, still unmistakable, brightened faintly. "Lydia," he breathed. "You came." She hesitated at the doorway before moving closer. "You wanted to see me." He nodded weakly, his lips trembling. "I heard you have a family. A daughter." Lydia swallowed. "A granddaughter now," she said softly, lifting the baby for him to see. "His name is George." The old man's eyes glistened. "After me?" "After the man I wanted to forgive," she said. For a moment neither spoke. Outside, the rain drummed softly against the window. George reached out a trembling hand, and Lydia took it. His grip was light, like the ghost of a touch. "I wanted to save you," he whispered, "but I broke you instead." Tears welled in her eyes, hot and unstoppable. "Yes," she said, her voice shaking. "You did, but I'm not broken anymore." He closed his eyes, a faint smile flickering. "Your mother would be proud." Lydia leaned down and kissed his forehead. "Rest now, Dad." When she left the hospice, the rain had stopped. The clouds were parting, revealing a thin strip of pale blue over the city. She looked down at the baby sleeping in her arms and whispered, "It's over." And as she stepped into the light, the past, at last, began to fade like the storm behind her. The garden bloomed again that spring. After a long winter of rain and silence, the camellias returned, pink and white against the deep green leaves, swaying gently in the coastal wind. Lydia knelt by the soil, her hands firm yet careful, pressing roots into the earth with a tenderness that came only from knowing loss. The air smelled of salt and new beginnings. Rachel stood a few feet away, watching her mother work. "You always make it look easy," she said, smiling as she rocked baby George in her arms. "I can't keep a houseplant alive for more than a week." Lydia laughed softly, the sound carried away by the wind. "It's not about skill," she said. "It's about patience. You have to wait through the seasons that look dead before anything beautiful comes back." Michael emerged from the shed, carrying a wooden trellis he'd built the week before. "And sometimes," he added, setting it beside the fence, "you just need the right support." Rachel rolled her eyes affectionately. "Dad and his metaphors," she teased. The twins were in the yard, chasing each other with paper airplanes. Ben's voice rang through the breeze. "Mine's winning." Sam countered, "You can't win at flying." Their laughter cut through the morning calm, bright and untamed. Lydia brushed the dirt from her gloves and looked around. The house they had built, patched, painted, loved into wholeness, stood against the horizon, facing the sea like an old friend. For years, this place had held her through storms, heartbreak and joy. Now it held 3 generations of their family, bound not by bloodlines alone, but by choice, forgiveness, and the courage to stay. Rachel knelt beside her, helping to pat down the soil around a new plant. "You think they'll take?" she asked. "They already have," Lydia replied. "They just need time." The clouds parted slowly, letting the sunlight spill across the garden. The petals of the camellias caught the light, glowing almost translucent. Lydia reached out and touched one gently, as if greeting an old friend returned after too long. Her throat tightened, but not with grief, just gratitude. Michael came to stand behind her, resting a hand on her shoulder. "You did it, you know," he said quietly. "You turned everything that hurt into something that grows." Lydia looked toward the ocean, where the waves moved in slow, steady rhythm. The wind lifted her hair as she whispered, "I didn't do it alone." Rachel smiled. "None of us do." For a while, they stood there together, Lydia, Michael, Rachel, the twins, and little George, each framed by the soft hum of the sea and the scent of blooming camellias. Lydia tilted her face toward the horizon, the sunlight warm against her skin. The tide shimmered like glass, endless and forgiving. She exhaled, the weight of years dissolving into the salt air. "Some storms never end," she murmured, almost to herself. "They just change color." And as the garden swayed in the light, everything, past, present, and what was still to come, felt quietly, beautifully whole again.